Name of the talk is You Don't Need a Framework for That. The slides are there. My name is Estelle Weyl. I am a Twitter whore. Please follow me at Estelle VW. I've been writing some books. Mostly I write about CSS, HTML, and mobile. And that's why not using a framework is important to me, because on mobile that's kind of important. So if you were lucky, you got a book yesterday, which this one's out. These 3 are coming out this year. I'm co-author on all 3 of them, or 4 of them. Oh, and all statements are those of my employer and not necessarily mine. I'm a freelancer, so yeah. So this is my first framework, or a site using my first framework. It worked in Netscape 4.7, IE5 and 5.2, and IE5. And it was kind of cool then. It's actually not too bad now. It's actually tableless. And when I wrote the framework, the important thing I needed to test for, and the reason I needed a framework was because some browsers did not support getElementById. So I was feature detecting getElementById. And feature detecting for document all. And that's kind of why people created frameworks in the first place, to normalize features across browsers. We have add-event-listener, which is a WC3 spec, but Internet Explorer and Opera started off with attach event. And older browsers, like IE5 on the Mac and Netscape 4, didn't have either one, so you could only use an on event handler. So that's why people started using frameworks. When it comes to mobile, we don't need to normalize as much because most mobile browsers support all modern features, but we've been using frameworks and not necessarily learning how to code JavaScript. So frameworks became necessary because we want to code easier, and these were the frameworks I pulled. I pulled these 4 weeks ago, so there's probably about 8 new ones since then. And then we have mobile frameworks, and then we have my very favorite framework of all, but there's still a problem with HTML9 responsive bootstrap, because when you run it, you get puppies instead of kittens. But we'll fix that soon. So frameworks are good. It's important to not reinvent the wheel. So I'm not saying don't ever use frameworks. Definitely there's a need to use frameworks. You don't want to reinvent the wheel, so use a framework. But you don't want to reinvent the wheel, so don't create a 27th framework that we need to learn, so you can present it at a JavaScript conference. Instead, contribute to ones that are already out there. You know, if you have a really good idea or you think something's missing, contribute to it. So don't reinvent the wheel. And 4,218 brains are better than one. Like, if I was to use a framework, I would think that all of you guys combined are almost smarter than me. No, I'm kidding. You guys are definitely, like, together. And so we have all this brain power behind frameworks. And the cool thing about frameworks is you have brilliant people working on it, so you have faster, more optimized code than I would create myself. Function chaining and implicit iteration behavior, that's like awesomely cool and not really native in JavaScript yet. You're writing less code, so it's faster to code. And there's a faster learning curve, so there's actually almost no reason to know JS, and that's what scares me, that you don't actually need to know JS. What I really hate is, like, this is a total WTF, but I see this all the time. Someone is importing jQuery to add a class to the first element on a page, right? For real. So that's why vanilla.js is a really good idea. If you can do it, do it. This is a little snippet of code that Chris Coyier came in. Does everyone know who Chris Coyier is? He is awesome. Follow him on Twitter. Follow his blog. It's on CSS. It's css-tricks.com. He's amazing. But when he uses JS Fiddle, he uses a library, he pulls in jQuery for these 3 lines of code. What this 3 lines of code does basically puts the URL right here as a background, the fave icon directly from the site. Very cool, 3 lines of code. I'm not going to, I have the code in larger text in a few slides. This is my version of it. It's just a little bit uglier. It's also 3 lines of code. Oops. But you'll notice here, no library, pure JS, right? Output, exact same, right? So here's his code above. There's my code below. It's actually the same number of lines, but it looks longer because it's actually longer text. Document query selector all instead of $. So what's the difference? About 60 characters here, but he's imported jQuery min.js from an external domain. What that means is he's imported 96 kilobytes. He made an extra HTTP request. He did an extra DNS lookup because the app was not on Google APIs, so he had 2 domains. And parsing that jQuery took 4 joules. You're like, who the hell cares about 4 joules? Your phone users, your mobile users care about their 4 joules. They don't know that, though, but they do. Because, like, let's say you're doing Wikipedia, which kind of uses jQuery to do get element by ID, which is not necessary. And I'm totally quoting from Maximiliano 2 days ago. But basically, mobile matters. Whenever you're using JavaScript, parsing JavaScript, it's not just the download of the JavaScript, it's not just the bytes over the network, it's not just the DNS request, it's parsing that JavaScript. When you go from page to page, you're parsing your JS again. And that is consuming CPU, it's consuming energy, it is draining your user's battery. I apparently have a meeting today. And if you're interested in more mobile, I'm just going to give myself a plug here. Velocity Conference next month in Santa Clara. I'm doing a talk. This is a slide from that talk on mobile performance. And if you just want to see the presentation, it's right here. So if you're interested, diving deeper in that, you totally can. Let's hit next. So there's also a really good article on battery usage where all those statistics that I just said came from. Because I would not have known personally that it took 4 joules, but it's in this article. Another reason you don't want to have too much JS is not just for mobile, but it is if you are doing a third-party widget that you think people are going to port in. So you have your website. Can you imagine if your Flickr button and your Google Plus button and your Twitter button and every one of those was pulling in jQuery? You have 5 versions of jQuery all being pulled in. So if you're creating a widget to put on a page, don't add a framework to it. Use vanilla JS. Yesterday's talk, 8 simple rules for running your JavaScript on my page, is a very good example of doing third-party. This link right here is not to Kent Brewster's talk, it's to the actual source code of his final library. So if you're going to do a widget, third-party widget, look at that. Okay, let me go on. So vanilla JS, that's what I code in. When I code, I first code in vanilla JS, and I code only in Chrome. And then, like, when I'm done with my application, it works awesome. I open it up in 97, I go, shit. And I import jQuery. But at least I'm learning how to code. If I was starting with jQuery, I wouldn't actually know JavaScript anymore because I'd be reliant on it. So a few things. If possible, make your home pages work with, like, if you're doing an application and it's completely JavaScript and everything needs to load like Google Mail, I understand using a framework. But if you're doing a page and the only real interaction you have on the home page is a drop-down navigation, don't make them have to download your entire library just to open up your navigation bar. Instead, make your home pages work before the library needs to be downloaded, and then download it at the end. But don't make your users wait for that. Oops. A few other things. Because while you're, I just said this, but that's incorrect English. While you may not support you only have JavaScript users, realize that your users have no JavaScript until it's downloaded. So do your minimal things with vanilla JS. And the last reason to use vanilla JS is you can get and maintain mad JavaScript skills. So remember our smackable code? You just want to hit the person that wrote this. How can we do this without importing a library? Simply. One thing to note is I don't have enough room. My slides aren't wide enough, so I'm not going to declare my variables, so don't hit me over the head for not declaring my variables. I'm declaring them here, so I don't have to declare them later on, so I have less room. So in vanilla.js, I have my document queryselector all, li, and then I use classlist to add the first class. If you don't know what this is, and you don't know what that is, that's awesome, because that's what I'm going to talk about in about 5 minutes, so don't worry. But that's one line of JavaScript. It does exactly what this snippet did, and it's supported all the way back to IE8. Oh, no, it's not because of class list, but this part is. You could just do class name first. Or you could just use CSS. Li first of type, and then put whatever your declarations were going to be right here, and it's going to hit it. So, yes, JavaScript is awesome, but it is not always necessary. Here's a few more examples. That's a Stripe table, and there's some people in this room whose names are on it. They're all amazing JavaScript developers. Myself, I'm first. No, I'm kidding. And so what I did is I did nth of type odd, background color white, nth of type even, background color gray, and we have a stripy table. No background, no, that's just CSS. There's no back end adding of the class, and there's no front end JavaScript adding of the class. Nth of type is not supported in IE 7 or 8. It is in 9. So if you really wanted to make it supported, this is vanilla.js. var tr equals document get elements by tag name tr, and then you loop through them and you set attribute class to odd. 3 lines of JavaScript. Do not import a library just to stripe a table. And then we have drop-down navigation. Ooh, pretty. How many people have included a jQuery or have seen a jQuery library imported? It's not you. You did not do this. You saw someone else do this, but imported a JavaScript library just to do a drop-down nav. Okay, some people are being honest. Awesome. Because the rest of you are lying. So all I did is I scaled from 0% height to 100% height on hover. And I scaled over 0.2 seconds. Fairly simple. This works in all modern browsers. It does not work in IE. Well, it works prefixed in all modern browsers. It doesn't work in IE 7 and 8, but in IE 7 and 8, it would show it if I just add 2 extra lines of code. If you actually want to do it, this is the part that makes it work in IE 7, and this is the part that makes it work in all browsers. That looks ugly right now. You can use Sass, you can use less, but you know what? This crap right here, all this crap, is less than importing a library, and it also doesn't use up as much CPU, because if you're doing this using JavaScript instead of CSS, when you're doing it, you're using up your user's battery if they're on a mobile device, or if they're unplugged. What does this say? It says CSS is awesome. But so it's JavaScript, so let's learn some JavaScript. First thing I want to cover is get elements by class name. It's been supported since IE 9. Kind of ridiculous that they couldn't figure out how to get an element by class name earlier than that. But what is the syntax? Simple, get element by class name, foo. You can do it on a DOM node. You can do it on any DOM node. So here we've found what L is, and we do it on that. The jQuery equivalent is basically this, $.bar. Difference, no dot here, there is a dot here. Both of these two return a live node list. And what do I mean by live node list? If you're looking at the code, I apologize. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I realized that there was a quirk, and I actually just made these event handlers right on the element. So yes, I have an on-click on my buttons. I apologize. I'll fix that later. But basically, originally, there's 52 slides. I create a slide, but I'm not finding out what slides is again. So I add a slide, and now it knows it has 53 slides, even though I haven't called this again. So it's a live node list. The problem with get element by class name, or the thing to remember, it's not really a problem, it's normal, is that an empty node list will return true. So if you say if slides, it will actually be true because it's returning a node list, although it's empty. So here in this example, I'm saying get elements by class name ZXCV. I can promise you I don't have ZXCV in my code. If I test me, it actually returns true. So an empty node list is true. The length is 0, but it is true. And classes are case sensitive, so is the get element by class name. This is a spec if anyone wants to read it. I'm not going to stay on it, but it's just a resource in the deck. Next thing I want to cover is the Selectors API. IE8 couldn't figure out how to get an element by class name, but it can figure out how to get an element by class by using the Selectors API. So the Selectors API kind of allows you to do this in one line of code as well. Instead, we have 2 key terms, and this is what you saw in that slide earlier. If you didn't know what that slide said before, you're going to learn it now. We have queryselector and queryselector all. Queryselector returns a reference to this one element that it found, #bar. If this had been, li, it would have found the first li in the document and returned that. So it doesn't have to be an ID, but usually it's an ID because you only have one ID, so that's often what you're doing. But what you noticed here is I could have also done, let's say bar was an li. I can put any CSS selector in there. And then we have queryselector all, which is approximately the same thing, but instead of returning one element, it returns a node list of all of the elements. But the thing is, this is actually a slow process because it returns a static node list, so it actually gets all of them. Whereas the get element by class name is just a pointer to it, and so it remembers that this is what we mean. Here it's actually so it's a bit slow, but it's not slow enough to make a difference in most cases. So here we did originally bar. Here we're doing .foo. We could have also just done it in one line. Children equals document query selector all #foo. And you guys all know this as a descendant selector. So we have query selector all, and just like in CSS, you can put complex selectors in here. So this one's saying query selector, find the first one of any element that either has the ID, any li, or the element that has the ID of slides. So if I ran this on the page, it would actually return the back button. I know that because I did it. And query selector all, you can say, remember how we had that stripy table? If you needed to target them all for some other reason, you could do li nth of type odd, and that would work fine. It would return every odd. That would be an li before it was a tr, but generally the same idea. If you want more reference, these two are actually active links, if you're looking at the slides later on, to the specifications. So get element by class name was a live node list, and this is a static node list. So in case you don't fully get the difference, when I run this, we currently have 53 slides on the page. I got them by class name, and I got them by query selector all, 53 and 53. I'm going to add a few. And here, get element by class name has been updated because it's reflecting a live node list. Selector all, it's still remembering what we told it to remember a while ago. So it's static. It's not updating as with updated slides at the end of this deck. Does that make sense to people? Okay. Oh, yeah?
I've never heard of a live node list before. Is that super common that when you get a node list that it's live like that, or is that only when you're using a selector?
The question was, is it super common that you're getting a live node list, or is it only when you're using a selector? It's basically when you're using, you should always know what the method that you're calling. Is it returning a live node list or a static node list? And that's why I'm telling you here. So it has nothing to do with which selector you picked. It has to do with what method you used. So I can also go into more depth later on about live and static if you want to. But it's really which method you used, not which selector you used. Okay, so the other reason that kind of libraries are fantastic, but don't pull them in if you really don't need to, is the native iteration. So when you pull in jQuery, you can just do a dot and put a method right after it, and it goes, oh, so first we're getting all the slides, and then we're going to go through all the slides, and we're going to add a class called current. Natively, what you have to do is, you get all your slides with queryselector all, same exact selector here, right? It's the same exact selector. But then you have to actually purposely iterate through them. So var I equals 0, I slides length, is less than the length, I plus plus. And this is actually pretty fast because it only has to measure it once, but I could have pulled it out and put it over here and just, given it a variable for that. And then slides I dot classlist dot add current. So 1 line versus 3 lines, but I'm saving bringing in a whole library if this is all I really needed. So this might be new to you right there, class list. So let's cover that if I get out of here. So class list. Unfortunately, class list gets no Internet Explorer love yet. And the other thing is, if you are going to be doing mobile, all of this stuff has worked on all the mobile devices that are currently popular. Class list didn't come to Android till Android 3, so this might bite you in the butt, but pretty soon you'll be able to use it, so I'm going to cover it. Class list is exactly like add class, remove class, toggle, and has class. You get the class list property with a bunch of methods, add, remove, toggle, and contain. So you just learned it. Wow, that was quick. If you've done jQuery, this is kind of the same thing, except for except for this is doing iteration. So this is just looking for that single element because you should only have one ID called foo, and that's why this looks pretty. Otherwise, you would have to iterate through it. But what you want to note here is you have this class list object which has some methods, and so you're actually running the methods on the class list, right? You're not running it on the element. So here I've said foo class list. That's what this stands for, foo CL, to the class list. And I'm executing these methods on the class list itself, not on the element. Does that make sense to people? I just don't want to get people get confused. So this is not a live node list or closed node list. It is actually live. It'll check it every single time. So a class list is a live value. If you update it from a different method, it will know what your class list is. I'm sorry? So if you omit class list, yeah. No. Class list is the list of classes on that element, and that's what it means. So if you did a query selector foo.add without this here, it would be like, I have no clue, add is not a method of this DOM node. I don't know actually what the error would be. It wouldn't actually be that helpful. It would probably be illegal token or something that makes no sense. So this is basically all there is to know about it. You get the class list, and you run either add, remove, toggle, or contains on that class list, and realize that just like any other object, you have all the methods that you want that are inherit from object, such as toString. And other thing to note, no IE, and start in Android 3 with support. One more thing. Sometimes why people include libraries, but please don't include a library just because you don't want to do a for statement, or a for loop rather. These two are equivalent. This gets all the elements called with class foo, adds the class bar. This finds all the elements with class foo, and iterates through each one of them to add the class, to add bar to the class list of every single node that it collected. Does that make sense? You guys now know what class list means, and you guys know what query selector is and query selector all. So the last thing I really want to go over is data-attributes and Dataset. All browsers support the get attribute, so you can use this. The data-attribute is supported everywhere because browsers don't give a crap what kind of attributes you make up. But the Dataset natively is supported since IE 10, but in all other browsers, so let's use it. So no one who actually worked on this, there's 3 people attending this conference that wrote this bad code, and I'm the only one partially responsible that is here in this room, I think. Yes, I was going to have them stand up and take a bow. But this is a crap code like there's no tomorrow, and I am partially responsible. But it's a span with a target attribute. Who here has heard of the target attribute on the span element? Wow, you guys should not be coding. There is no such thing. The rel attribute should have a certain meaning. In this case, we are totally hijacking it. And then we created our own attributes called EVT and omnit. This was for omniture tracking. And then we created a class called external link, which really was not used as a class, but was used to tell JavaScript that this should be turned into an external link. So what we really should have done is done this. Data-usage, external link, because that's the usage. EVT, omnit, link. So all I did is put a data in front of all of these, and then I pulled out something I'm using in my JavaScript. So what does this all mean? Data dash are author-defined attributes, so you can create any attribute you want. So in this case here, all you do is do data dash and then you create a name. So in this case, I created data dash foo dash bar equals test. If I want to set or get, this would get it, and this would set it. Right? Simple. This slide we've already gone over. So I could dynamically set it, or I could set it on the back end and send it to the server and then use those attributes, just like I could use HTML5 form attributes in my JavaScript. So in this case, we created usage external link. And why did we create usage external link? Because we might have many different usages. So this is just a fake JavaScript. This actually is not part of that bad site's code. But it gets all the elements that have the data usage attribute, and then it goes through them and says, if the value is external link, then create an external link. If it's an internal link, create an internal link. If it's a download link, create a download link. So basically, use the data dash attributes to communicate with your JavaScript and say, hey, this is what I want to do with this. It's basically those non-semantic things, and you don't want to use them for semantic. Like if you actually are trying to tell the user something or Google something, don't use the data dash attributes. Thing to note is when you are referring to them in JavaScript, you remove the word data dash and then you camel case the rest. So the HTML attribute itself, you could write data dash foo dash bar all capital and it would completely work in HTML because HTML, the attributes are not case sensitive, even though they should be, so please use XHTML writing standards and make them all lowercase so we can all read your code later on. But to access it, you basically get rid of the data dash, and then you camel case the rest. So here we have foobar. That's the way it would be. So in this case here, we've set ABC to frog, because I like frogs. For ICE 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, until they support Dataset, you can actually use getAttribute, and you can say data-a-b-c, or for modern browsers, you can use either of these two methods. It works fine. Let me just prove it to you. There we go. Yay. What do I use them for? You're like, okay, that's all well and good. What do I use it for? I created this game, and it's a card game. It's kind of like concentration, and then I want people to be able to pause it. So each card has a value. Each card has a row and a column, and then a suite, hearts or diamonds or whatever. So in this case, when I store it, this is not exactly the code's a little bit longer, but I do a for in, so for var key in cards data set, because each element on your page, each DOM node has a data set if data set is supported. I don't need to know what those keys are. So that's what makes Dataset really powerful. This is the browser support, but the important things to note is it is intended for site scripts, not publicly usable metadata. That's what I was saying about Google. The data name is case insensitive, but it will be forced into being case sensitive if you're in JavaScript. Not the value itself, but you definitely want to, if you're calling it or setting it, you want to camel case it. Oh, in JS, camel case, drop the data. All browsers can use data dash attributes. All browsers except for IE support accessing with the dataset property. For IE, you want to use getAttribute. So when it comes to mobile, 99% of mobile visitors in the United States will support your add event listener, right? Because IE9 on the mobile device supports it, and all the other OSs support it. So there's no reason to import a framework just for that. For mobile, feature detection is the issue, not code parity, because we're basically coding for all modern browsers that are all supporting the same thing. So we're no longer reporting frameworks for that. Memory latency, CPU usage are major concerns on mobile. I think the next one says that. JS drains batteries, so minimize your JavaScript. So weigh the pros and cons of including a library. It just might not be worth it. And in general, as if I hope I've proved this point, if you can do it in a few lines of code, don't import a library. If you can make a home page work without the library, even if you're going to make the home page work again in your library, make the home page work, like whatever little feature. Make your navigation bars enable the pop-opens or whatever they're going to need. Don't make them wait for your whole library to download, because you all know that JavaScript needs to be downloaded, parsed, and executed before it continues writing, right? I'm preaching to the choir. Don't import libraries as part of 3D widgets, 3rd-party widgets. I can't stress this enough. There's nothing, like, there's so many third-party, I mean, that's why all these companies piss people off, because they're basically being single point of failures. Use libraries as a tool, not a crutch, and learn to code JavaScript. And if you're teaching stuff, learn people to code JavaScript before you teach them jQuery, and because you always need to think about mobile nowadays. And that is it for the main portion of my talk. And I thought I was going to go 15 minutes over. Instead, I went 4 minutes under. Are there any questions? Yes?
Live node list versus static node list. Every time you refer to a live node list, it refers to DOM.
So what happens with okay, so the question is, live node list versus static node list, does it always traverse the DOM? So with a static node list, when you get a static node list, that's when it goes through the DOM, it traverses the DOM. When you make a reference to a live node list, it basically references it, so it's really quick. It's about 50%, it's about 50 times slower to get a static node list the first time than it is to get a live node list. Nicholas Zakis wrote a great article on this. So if you go to, anyone knows it's slickneck.com, his domain name? Or NCZ Online. He's got a great article on this. He basically compared the two. So that's where I'm getting my stats, because I don't actually do performance testing on things like this, even though I should. But it makes a reference to the, you're basically getting a reference to the live node list, but you're actually pulling the static node list. So yes, there is a big difference. It does go through the DOM. Anytime you basically are asking how many DOM nodes are there, unless you've already stored it, cached it, it's going through it. If I'm wrong, please let me know. Any other questions?
So you're saying that the live node list is essentially a pointer or a collector?
Well, when you're first getting it, because you're basically saying, what is this node list? It's a pointer. It can't.
It's actually assembling static copies, that's why it's 50 times slower than it doesn't ever go.
Because you're basically creating, you're basically capturing a node list. It's returning, it's returning the whole node list. So it's capturing it and storing a copy of it versus just storing a reference to it. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you have any examples of how you would structure your code? So like if you have jQuery as a fallback, you're writing the same thing twice then, aren't you?
So let me just use like what I had at first as an example. I'm just going to go to the pages that don't show up until I load them. I'm using this as an example, just because I have it in my code. So here, these two examples are what they're doing. I'll go to this one right here. this is what they're doing. They're adding these background images here. That's what they're both doing. This is the code for both of them. In this one, I need to declare this after jQuery. This might be the best example because this is like an added feature. I don't really care that my icons don't show up. It's not blocking my user. So this I might put in the library. But let's say this was actually vital to the, I'm using this as an example. So let's say this was vital to my user's experience instead. I would put this before I download my 27. I'd still put it on the bottom of the page, but I put it above what I want to declare what I need, just on the home page. Like, hey, do this, and then pull down the library and all the JavaScripts that I'm going to cache locally for my app. SurveyMonkey does this on their homepage. They actually, their homepage runs with vanilla JS, and then they download all their jQuery libraries afterwards. They've narrowed it down to 2, but they used to have like 6, and now it's narrowed down a lot. But it runs. Everything that's needed for the user to interact with the page is right above the 2 very large library pools. So it starts working as soon as possible. But it has to work after the DOM is loaded because it's actually, in this example, it's impacting the DOM. So the DOM needs to be there. Any other questions? Attaching an event to a live list. That is actually like one of so the question is, how about attaching events to a live list? When you're using vanilla JS, you're going to have to attach an event when you create, but you're also going to have to attach the event. You're going to have to attach the event anyway, because if you're creating something, and this actually bit me in the tush because I decided to use live in jQuery one time because I don't really use jQuery, but I had to use jQuery on this project, so I did live, and then I dynamically created this window, and the live was in the dynamic creation of the window, so I basically, it would do a pop-up window, and then the next time it did the pop-up window, it would open up that pop-up window, but open up another pop-up window, because on the button, I kept adding live, and so it kept adding the open a pop-up window multiple times onto the same button. So I should not have used live. It's basically, you're using .click instead of live. You're not re-adding it like you would with live. Any other questions? Yes. I make snarky remarks on my Estelle VW, and then on my other one, I just retweet CSS tips and HTML5 tips. So if you don't want to know what my personality is like, go to Standardista. But I think my last tweet today was Facebook really needs a who gives a shit button. So if you want snarky comments, those are not going to be retweeted on Standardista. Yes? Which one's your mom following? My mom does not know that Twitter exists. And she's not my friend on Facebook, even though she keeps trying. Standardista would be really boring for my mom, and if my mom ever found my regular Twitter account, I'd be in so much trouble. Yes?
What do you think about Zepto.js?
I've never tried Zepto.js, actually. That's one of my issues with frameworks is like and that's one of like, I'm kind of like, people, instead of creating a new library just for the sake of creating a library, figure out what's bothering you about the current library and see if you can work with one, like the one that most closely mirrors what you like, and add that feature to that library.
The reason I ask is it's kind of intended for mobile. It's like 5% the size of jQuery, and it kind of wraps all this, but you have the same syntax as jQuery.
That's the one that's written by Thomas Fuchs, right? Yeah. It's on my list of things to look at when I have time, but my stack of textbooks on my bed, if they weren't virtual, would be like bad. Any other questions? So let me just reiterate what he said. Zeptos.js is a mobile framework that is about 1/7, you said, the size of jQuery. And basically, I assume, just the features that you would need for mobile. You don't need to use attach events. I assume that Yeah, WebKit only, okay. Any other questions? Just one more comment, since there's no more questions. In terms of mobile performance, O'Reilly is having a conference called Velocity in Santa Clara at the end of June, and I am going to be giving a talk on mobile performance considerations. I'm actually doing a tutorial there, but I don't need to market it, and if you can't come, because one conference is enough in the month of June, kind of, here's a presentation right here, and it goes over all of the battery and latency issues, and I'm going to be updating that, so it's going to have even more updated stuff. But one thing to note is, in terms of mobile, do not use JavaScript for animation. Use CSS3 for animation. I can't stress that enough. But if you're using JavaScript or jQuery, you're basically hitting the CPU incessantly, like 60 frames per second incessantly. CSS3 animations is meant for that. If you use, it can actually be on the hardware accelerated. It'll perform better. It'll look better. So definitely don't use animation libraries that are JavaScript based on mobile. Well, that's it for my talk then. I'll be here if you have any questions. Thanks.